When you have two people in front of you, how would you actually evaluate who is the smartest? Chances are you're probably going to listen to them talk, hear what they have to say, and then figure out whether that person is smart or not based on your own internal definition of what being smart is. Now, for the most part, being academically smart is something that we consider as an add on to everything and not really the marker to whether someone is smart or not. Hear me out on this. What I mean by that is generally, the person in question would have to have all the other parts of their life figured out and then have passed maybe academically smart on top of that before we consider them as smart, rather than it being the other way around where the academically smart are really good at what they do in the industry that they're researching or whatever or learning about, but then their life is falling apart and so on. So that's what I would say is happening. So for the most part, that I think is the way that we would determine how someone is smart intuitively though, and that's that's how it seems things play out in the real world. But well, that's not really how things work in our own minds. For the most part, for the most part in the urban world, it seems that the certificate or the degree holds more value to most people than the actual person. Which, well, given the way we were somewhat raised, it somewhat makes sense that we were thought that these things were the most important things from the time we could even think for ourselves. So it makes sense, but don't we really have things a bit more backwards? And for this episode, I'm somewhat doing things a bit more radio-y, like the original idea I had. But anyway, let's get back into it. Let's take our own languages for example. Now, for the most part in South Africa, our languages seem only to matter when we're talking amongst each other or when we're at home, as in back home with our family and so on. But in the professional setting, to some extent, it feels as though not being able to speak English as fluently all the time is taken as a sign of not being smart enough. Whereas in another setting, that same person who wasn't able to speak fluently, that'd be the person you'd seek out help for 9 times out of 10. So, in some sense, do we not value our own languages and cultures too much, or rather, are we trying to balance between living in a world that really wasn't really created for us or with us to begin with? Do we not value our own languages as much, or are we trying to balance living in a world that wasn't created by us or for us to begin with? And are we trying to live in this world with values that we have gotten that weren't really ours as well to begin with? It's more, the way I say it, a battle of cultures. Perhaps not really externally, but internally, that we're trying to survive by following a culture that's not ours, when perhaps taking care of our own communities or following our own cultures really isn't lucrative enough. And perhaps another thing is that we may be taking our own cultures for granted, as in, our cultures have been there for a very long time and they're somewhat great or good enough to the point that we don't realize that they're there. So we take for granted that they've always be there or that they'll always be with us or something that we can always fall back on, that we don't realize their importance or their value behind them, that we'd always want to look out for more or go out there and look out for what's out there, what's more, instead of being certified or at least grounded or appreciative of what we have in our own cultures and our own and what makes us us to some extent. Now, this is something that perhaps is a lot more prone to, well, my peers than to the old generation. But another thing that I think we all perhaps may be falling prey to is judging how smart someone is by their appearance without really realizing that there's a lot more going on with them, inside them, than we could actually even begin to realize. It's more that the deep dark pit that we have within ourselves is the same as the deep dark pit that they have within themselves. And well, I just like using the deep dark pit because that's pretty much been my experience with it, but that's not really the point. It's just that the way we view ourselves, our internal systems, just our true selves, our internal systems, our emotions, all of that, how we deal with that is the same thing that they're dealing with as well. So, but really, it's not the actual cover that makes the person, but rather the book or the contents within the cover. That is, even when the person may not be good at bringing out the contents of the book or being able to explain what's inside or being able to explain themselves clearly or properly. Right now, as it stands, I don't even know if being smart is something we should define as binary or not, which one brings me to what I did now. So, some of you might not know what binary is, and that's okay. But really, what I'm talking about is the use of big words to signify how smart you are. And Which brings me back to the original point that I made at the start of the video. So if it is being used in a way where that is the word that we can find, or that is the best word that we can come up with, then I think that's okay. But if we're then trying to just prop up ourselves by using big words, then to some extent, doesn't that just show how nonsensical our own priorities are in our own lives, that we have to use big words to just inflate how important we are? But all in all, this is just a perspective on intellect, and there's really a lot more that we hide behind as humans. Like, this isn't really the only trick we use. There's so many other different things to hide, or not confront what's happening within us. And after all, we are all just people, and we always create our own problems, whether or not that may be problems or not. This really is just a perspective on intellect, but there is a lot more that we hide behind on, say, not wanting to confront our own selves, or hiding some insecurities, or just hiding behind something in order to run away from something, or just not face something. That's just many of the things that we do. And after all, we are just people, and we will always create our own problems, even if those problems that we create weren't problems to begin with. But as people, we always find the need to seek out problems in order for us to solve them. But I suppose whether those problems are problems or not to begin with really just depends on perspective. But that perhaps is what makes all of this a lot more harder to navigate and figure out.